What is going on, everybody? It's me, your host, Nicholas Willard, and you're listening to another episode of Almost Canon. Now, if you've experienced the unknown or the paranormal and you want to share your story, then please send us an email at almostcanonpod@gmail.com or hit us up with a message through our social medias on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It doesn't matter which one. Just send us a message. We want to hear your story. Also, don't forget to leave a rating and a review. These ratings and reviews help Almost Canon stay in the charts, stay on the ball field with the big players. There's so many podcasts out there, and your rating and your review will help Almost Canon stay relevant in the search fields for others to find the show. But enough is enough. You didn't come here to listen to me talk about messages or reviews. You came here to listen to some weird and crazy stories. Now this week I figured, summer is here. People are finally getting out of the house and enjoying the fresh air. So what would be better than to talk about some missing 411 cases? And I'd like to point out that it is missing 411, not missing 411. That just doesn't make sense. I mean, missing 411. It's the 411, right? You might not be old enough to remember this, but you used to be able to pick up a phone, dial 411 to get the local information for the area that you're in. People would go, "What's the 411? Well, that meant, what's the lowdown? What's going on? Give me some information about this place." So yes, it is missing 411. It's just something that's always bothered me when I heard people call it missing 411. It's missing 411. But hey, you might be asking, what is missing 411? Well, missing 411 is a book series about people who have gone missing in national parks, national forests, and, things like that. These are cases, individual cases for individual people who have literally, I guess not all the time, however, most of the time, have just vanished without a trace. Some cases, there are bones that are found, there's clothing that is found. In some cases, there's literally nothing. These people have just vanished into thin air, it seems. Now, these books were written by David Paulides. He is an ex-detective. He used to be a police detective. I believe he was even a Bigfoot researcher. And while he was in the field researching Bigfoot, he had some park rangers come up to him and told him about some missing people and how it's strange that they seem to just vanish without a trace and there's no follow-up. They search for a week and then it's over and that's it. There's no database to track these missing people. So what David did, is he kind of compiled all these people together. He looked over all their cases and came up with some key similarities that all the missing 411 cases kind of have. So it's kind of like a rubric or a set of, I guess he just calls them key points that all these cases have to have in order to become a missing 411 case. Now, I've taken down several of my favorite cases, and I figured we would go over them tonight. I think these are some of the strangest, more mysterious, or bone-chilling cases that you can find within the missing 411 books. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's episode of Almost Canon. right, everybody. So the first case I wanted to discuss is the case of Stacy Arras. Now, Stacy went missing in the summer of 1981. She was 14 years old, and she had accompanied her father and 6 others on a 4-day backcountry camping trip in the Yosemite High Country. They had arrived at the Loop's last campsite, so they were kind of on a trail that looped around the mountain. They had arrived at the last campsite on Friday, July 17th, 1981. The site was known as the Sunrise High Sierra Camp and was made up of 9 cabins that were 9,400 feet above sea level within a beautiful alpine meadow called Tulum's Meadow. Now, after settling in, Stacy asked her father he wanted to go out and explore, go on a hike, because she wanted to photograph the nearby lake. However, he said no, so she set off by herself. And as she got, a little bit away from the cabin or the campsite they were staying at, she met up with an older gentleman who was on the horseback trail with them, the horseback trip, and his name was Gerald Stewart, and he was 77 years old. So this dude's pretty old, and he was on this horseback outing with them from the beginning, apparently. Now, apparently, Gerald would stop within sight of the camp and sit on a boulder near the path that led to the lake, and this was the last time he would speak with Stacy. Now, there's some reports that the party guide, a man named Chris Grimes, who had been working at the camp corral, was the last to see Stacy walking off over a small hill and into the trees towards the Sunrise Lake Trail. It was reported that nearly 100 people, 67 of which were of a mountain rescue team, 3 aircraft, and 2 teams of tracking dogs searched for Stacy. Chris Grimes would have been the last to have seen her. Gerald Stewart was the last to have talked to her. And she hit this trail going to take pictures of this lake, and she was never seen again. Now, it's usually reported that Stacy was wearing leggings when in fact she was wearing a pair of maroon and white striped shorts, an off-white windbreaker, and a white t-shirt. Now, because of where they were, the search area wasn't very large, which is why Stacy Arras' disappearance is also so strange. The only thing of Stacy's that was ever found was the lens cap to her camera, which she had put down apparently on a rock on or near the trail. And I got a quote here from one of the searchers. He says, "She just seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth." And that's exactly what seems to have happened. I mean, it's definitely weird. Now, while researching his early books, his early Missing 411 book, David Paulides applied for a FOIA report on Stacy's case, but has reported that Yosemite Park rangers have told him, "You'll never see it," and that giving the case file to David would interfere with future law enforcement proceedings. So that's strange as well. What does that even mean? I really have no idea. It's almost like they know or have an idea of what happened to Stacy, but we as the public will probably never find out. It's been reported that the case file is over 2,000 pages long, which is strange as the average missing person file within the park system is somewhere around 100 pages. In a strange twist, the skeletal remains of a still unidentified man was found a year or two after Stacy's disappearance, not far from the Sunrise Camp. And if I can remember right, this man was found like on a hillside, shoved into the rocks. But either way, Yosemite National Park might be our country's most iconic park, but the fact is, her beauty is hiding in unseen danger, and she's become a major hotspot for unexplained disappearances. Now, you might hear that and think, oh, she fell into a mine shaft, or she fell into a hole of some kind. It very well could be that something like that happened. However, the fact that park rangers literally told him that you will never see this file, and that it would interfere with future proceedings is very strange. That almost suggests they know exactly what happened to her. That's exactly what it sounds like to me. And that, they don't want to scare off their suspect, right? Well, this happened, like I said, in 1981. So their suspect's either long dead or he's very old at this point. I mean, if it was Gerald, the old dude who was going to go with her, he's definitely dead. However, it most likely wasn't Gerald, as people could see Gerald. And Gerald was not with Stacy. There's reports that there were some people who were walking down the trail back from the lake and past Stacy on the trail. But either way, she literally just vanished into thin air, it seems. So that's the Stacy Arras case. And the thing that gets me the most is the fact that the National Park System, the Rangers literally told him that he will never see this case. There's something going on with that case that's stopping them from, delivering it to David or anybody who files a FOIA report on receiving that case file. So I don't know. I mean, it gets me. There's something going on there, and I can't put my finger on it. I feel like it's just right out of reach. It's strange. It's definitely very, very strange. All right, now the second case I have is another strange one, and this one has a little more onto it that I'm going to add and discuss towards the end. But this is the disappearance of Samuel Boehlke. Now, Sammy, was 8 years old. He was autistic, and he disappeared on October 14th, 2006 from Crater Lake National Park. Now, Sammy and his dad, Kenneth, were staying at the Diamond Lake Resort not far from the park. And at around 3:30, they had drove into the park and stopped at the Cleetwood Cove Overlook, a small parking lot off the side of the Rim Road. I believe the road around the lake is called Rim Road. In this overlook, Cleetwood Cove Overlook, gave way to gorgeous views of the lake, Crater Lake, which made it easy to see why, Crater Lake is such a magical place, and why they would have stopped there to look over the lake. Now, Sammy had ran across the road and climbed a small embankment, and it was noted that he had picked up a rock and looked as though he was going to throw it at a cyclist who had also stopped at the pull-off to take a picture. It's also said, I've also seen that Sammy picked up the rock because he thought it was gold, and when he realized it wasn't, he was going to throw it. And the cyclist, warned Sammy not to throw the rock, and when his dad had yelled at him to put the rock down and to come back, Sammy turned the other way and ran off towards the woods. Now, this all went down around 4 o'clock. Now, while his dad was only 50 feet behind him, Sammy was never seen again. 50 feet. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens to me all the time. My kids run off. They're not very far in front of me, right? I'm right behind them. I couldn't imagine something like this happened to me. I mean, 50 feet. He was 50 feet behind him, and his son has just vanished. He's gone. 24 or so members of the local Klamath search and rescue team were in the woods by 6 p.m. and by Sunday, they had called for extra help. Nearly 2 feet of snow had fallen, which had hampered the search greatly. Now, one of those key details David Pilates had noticed is the fact that after these people go missing, some sort of freak storm or massive storm comes in and, disturbs the search or puts a big dampening on the search for the missing person. This is something that seems to happen over and over and over and over again, at least so many times that it has become one of these key points to a missing 411 case. 174 people would end up looking for Sammy. He was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed about 85 pounds. He had brown eyes and short brown hair. When he disappeared, he was wearing a long-sleeved black and green t-shirt, cargo pants, a blue winter coat, and red suede slip-on shoes with rubber soles. Now, this is something I picked up from the internet. So, director Kim Calmy from the Selwood Community Center, who ran a summer camp program attended by Sammy for several years, had this to say. Quote, "He liked to hide. He was good at hide and seek. He wouldn't understand his safety might be in danger if he didn't come out of his hiding place. And that he does have a tendency to take off. It doesn't surprise any of us that he got out of the car and took off. It's just a game to him." Now, she even refers to an incident where the class played hide and seek, but Sammy hid so well and wouldn't come out, and that he hid so well that they actually had to call in the police to come and find him. And when the police couldn't find him, his mother ended up yelling out that he had won the game, and then Sammy appeared from behind a tree where he had apparently buried himself under. So he was known to bury himself under the ground while playing hide and seek. I mean, this is interesting, right? Did Sammy bury himself to hide from his dad? And not, his dad he just didn't come out for his dad? I mean, that's clearly could be a possibility. I mean, it definitely sounds like that's exactly what could have happened, because Sammy literally disappeared. He was 50 feet in front of his dad. What's that? Less than 30 seconds in front of his dad. His dad had to climb the hill. By the time his dad climbed the hill, Sammy was gone. Never seen again. And he has not been found to this day. It's just a very interesting case, a very freaky case, a very strange case. I mean, he very well could have buried himself somewhere and then just never came out and, froze to death that night. Or got buried under the snow, wasn't able to come back out, something like that. We'll probably never know. But what I find most interesting about this case is that, in recent years, David has come out and said that the majority of people who go missing are either exceptionally smart, or they have autism, they're autistic in some way, or they have German ancestry. Now, these key points are very strange as well. And Sammy was autistic. Now, I don't know how far you want to take this, but just roll with it for a minute. So, there was a podcast that came out over the winter called The Telepathy Tapes. And in this podcast, they talked about how nonverbal autistic individuals are able to use telepathy to communicate with their caretaker or even their friends, and they're able to do this over long distances. It's a very interesting podcast. It literally blew my mind, and when I heard this, my conspiratorial mind instantly went to things like Stranger Things for once, because Stranger Things is based off actual, experiments the CIA did back in, the 50s, 60s, 70s, straight up through. They most likely even doing them today. I have no doubt that they're going on today, and that is where disappearances like Sammy's come into play. Are autistic children being taken in these national parks by these agencies to be tested on to see if they're able to do telepathy, if they're able to master these powers and use them as almost like superpowers, right? To astral project themselves or spy on individuals without actually having to be there to spy on someone. Are they able to use like telekinesis to do things? Is the government trying to figure out why they're able to do this, how they're able to do this? It just makes a lot of sense to me. They're stealing these kids, claiming that they're going missing, and then these kids are being, studied in secret wherever they are. It just makes a lot of sense to me. It's very strange that the majority of children who go missing in national parks are autistic or extremely smart, right? Are they capturing these smart people to force them to work for them? I don't know. I mean, this is all speculation, obviously. It's things I've thought about, but it seems to make a lot of sense to me, at least. I mean, the CIA has been trying to perfect, the psyops kind of stuff. These telekinetic warfare. I don't know the exact terminology, but they've been trying to do this forever. At least since the 1950s, right? And they were originally using like LSD to kind of jumpstart that area of the brain. I mean, they talk about it in the first season of Stranger Things. Like, this is all MK Ultra territory. Now, there's plenty of other projects other than MK Ultra that dealt with this. However, MK Ultra is definitely probably the most famous of the projects. It was covered up. Some people figured it out, and it dealt with some pretty weird shit. Now, this is exactly, I guess I should say, an autistic individual who's able to use telepathy is the exact type of person they want to be studying in those kind of projects. Now, the next case I want to talk about is the case of Tom Messick. So on November 15th, 2015, Tom Messick Sr. sat down on a tree stump in the woods behind Lily Pond in upstate New York, not far from Brant Lake, to go hunting. Tom and 6 others had set out that day to bag a buck, but when members of his hunting party walked off, hoping to drive a deer in his direction, no one expected that would be the last time they ever saw Tom. Now, 300 volunteers covered 30 square miles of remote Adirondack wilderness looking for Tom. Search and rescue teams assisted by police, firefighters, divers, and even helicopters would scour the forests, mountains, and waterways of the area, but Tom Messick was never found. It was like he had simply vanished without a trace. This is something we've heard over and over again so far. Now, even though authorities state no foul play is suspected in the disappearance of Tom, strangely enough, the Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved. Now, this is strange because the FBI doesn't typically involve itself in cases like Tom's unless it pertains to children, kidnappings, or federal property. Even to this day, nearly a decade later, the public and the Messick family have no idea why the FBI got involved. Now, why police continue to keep Messick's case active and work leads as they come, I don't know what the leads would be, but apparently it's active and they're working leads. There is one clue that we here at Almost Canon believe holds the key to Tom's disappearance that police most likely either overlooked or misinterpreted. You see, on that day in 2015, right around the time Tom was believed to have gone missing, the closest member of the hunting party to Tom's location mentioned hearing a strange metallic-like sound that he couldn't place. So what was this metallic noise and where did it come from? The fact is we have no solid answers, right? But we do have countless stories where a metallic grinding sound that is very similar to the one heard in the Messick case. So first off, the noise isn't always exactly the same, but we hear it being described as something like a car door being closed, to a chain link fence being rattled, or a metal drop-down door being slammed. I've heard it being described as wobbling sheets of metal, like a thunder sheet, and the track of heavy equipment rolling, like the tracks of an excavator. We hear it mentioned in stories from right here in the Bennington Triangle where mysterious vanishings have also occurred, to stories like Friedrich Valentich, who was an amateur pilot from Melbourne, Australia. And this dude also mysteriously disappeared mid-conversation with air traffic control, and the last thing that was heard was a strange metallic grinding sound. Now, our own guest host, Chad, heard this mysterious metal grinding sound while lost in the Pineview Cemetery, also known as the Gates to Hell in Troy, New York, which isn't far from Lily Pond and the last place Tom Messick was seen. Now, Chad heard the sound when they were transported through whatever portal they walked through. So what, this grinding sound is something that we've definitely heard about, and we have come to believe that it is the sound associated with the opening of some sort of interdimensional portal, and for one reason or another, Tom accidentally stepped through it. This could easily explain why Tom's body has never been recovered. Now, we don't understand the science behind it, however, we're sure the government does, which is exactly why the FBI was interested in Tom Messick's case. So, think about that for a minute. I mean, it's pretty crazy. It's a wild theory, but it makes a hell of a lot of sense. We know these gateways, these portals could scientifically exist. And that, as far as I'm aware, science has practically proved the existence of parallel dimensions, or if they're not necessarily parallel, they're definitely other dimensions that can be visited, only if we're able to. Now, are autistic children being captured who are able to use telepathy or other PK abilities to open these portals? Just like we saw in Stranger Things, right? With 11 when she freaked out, she opened the portal to the Upside Down. I mean, are these autistic children opening these portals on either on purpose or an accident? And individuals are accidentally stepping through them or falling into them or whatever you want to call it. It's very reasonable to believe that Tom literally saw this portal open and he was handicapped. He could not walk very well. He gets up from his stump, stumbles over to this portal, trips, falls into it, and it closes behind him and he's gone. Hence why his body has never been found. Nothing has ever been found. I've heard stories that locals don't even think Tom was ever even there. That something else had happened to him and they were trying to cover it up by coming up with this story. Now, I don't know a whole lot about that particular story, so I can't say much to it. I probably should have looked it up before I got on here and talked about it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the FBI was involved, and I don't necessarily know if these people, if they're trying to cover something up, if they can hide it from the FBI. But I guess it is possible. It happens every day. Now, the last case I have is an interesting one. I mean, they're all interesting. However, in this case, remains are found. And to really see the mystery, you need to look fairly deep at what's going on behind the curtain, I guess you could say. Now, this is the disappearance of Bart Schleyer. Now, the following information is something I pulled off an Unresolved Mysteries Reddit page. So, in September 2004, Bart went off for a trip in the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was when a chartered float plane left him at the larger of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon territory on September 14th. Now, Reed Lakes is on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, about 175 miles north of the town of Whitehorse, and the nearest settlement is Stewart Crossing, about 15 miles from the lake on the road from Whitehorse to Dawson. When the plane returned 2 weeks later, the experienced woodsman was gone. Strange, as he was no city slicker and knew how to handle himself in even the most remote wilderness. He could be described as a survival expert. He was well equipped for the trip with 3 plastic action-packed crates with enough food for at least 2 weeks, clothing and camp gear such as a tent and inflatable boat. He was reported missing on September 30th, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police promptly launched a comprehensive search and found nothing of Schleyer. According to the RCMP, he had lunch or supper in the camp since the remains were found, and the rest of the food was still in the crate. He used his boat and paddled it down the lake from camp. It was found half a mile from the camp. Now, the Mounties thought there was a possibility Schleyer might have hiked out to the highway, and with deteriorating weather, they called it a day. Dib Williams, a friend of Schleier's in Whitehorse, was dissatisfied with the RCMP efforts and got pilot friend Wayne Curry to fly them to the camp after the search teams had departed. They found his tent had been knocked down either by wind or animals, but all the equipment was there. They searched the area around the tent and found his backpack, bear spray, a knife, in a VHF radio. Williams and Curry got increasingly concerned as they didn't buy the story that Schleyer had hiked out when he left such key equipment behind. On the second day of the search, they found his bow near the inflatable boat. About 60 yards back in the woods from the boat, the bow and arrows and a handmade buckskin quiver were leaned up against a tree next to a dry bag full of gear on which he'd probably been sitting, and this was located on flat ground next to a thicket of black spruce and willows. Curtis, an experienced moose hunter, said it looked like the sort of place an archer might set up if trying to call a moose into range. A little further on, they found a camouflage face mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point, they called the RCMP back to the area. On October 3rd, the Mounties, Yukon conservation officers, and civilian volunteers flew back to the area to begin more detailed grid search. At first, they found little but bear and wolf tracks, but then a baseball cap was spotted by the search team, and then camouflaged pants were found, a camera, part of a skull, and just a few small bones. All these items were 60 meters or so from the bow and the spruce trees. Now, the teeth in the skull they found enabled identification of the remains, and it was Schleyer. There wasn't much more of his body found, so they really only found some of these bones, with the teeth. Since there was quite a bit of grizzly excrement in the area, it fueled speculation that Schleyer had been unexpectedly killed and eaten by a bear, as kind of like what happened to Timothy Treadwell and his girlfriend, whose deaths were captured in the documentary by Werner Herzog in 2006 called The Grizzly Man, based on what was left over of the video footage. Now, that's a pretty messed up story. I don't know if you ever heard the story of Timothy Treadwell, but it's a pretty crazy story. So, amongst the bear's scat were bone fragments, but no fabric. And some was in any of the samples. In Treadwell's case, not only human remains were found in the bear's stomach contents, but also large amounts of his clothing. Most of Schleyer's clothing were never found. But searchers were skeptical it was a bear attack. First, there was no sign of a death struggle, no vegetation or ground disturbed. The remains were found in a little patch of spare spruce laying on the moss, and if a bear killed them, this would be unusual as they usually bury their kills in a cache. The remains of Treadwell and his girlfriend were found in, a bear cache after being killed, but there was no cache anywhere in the area where they could find Schleyer. Now, even if he started off playing dead, which is a recommended tactic for surviving a grizzly bear attack, friends said he would have known that if the animal continued to attack, the only chance for survival would be to fight back. And generally speaking, a bear attack is something that's prolonged and violent. A friend said, "I think the least likely scenario is some sort of surprise encounter. It's hard for me to imagine having a bear sneak up and get him." Almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good of a woodsman, too alert while in the forest to have a bear catch him by surprise. And his hat, for example, was completely untouched. Now, if a bear had attacked Schleyer, it's hard to imagine that it could have killed him without touching his hat, without ripping it or putting a hole in it, puncturing it, whatever. It's incredibly hard to believe that didn't happen, especially when his skull was all that was found, or a piece of his skull. And like I said, it's extremely hard to imagine the animal killing him without leaving signs of a struggle on a site covered with soft, easily disturbed moss. An attack goes on for a long time. The audio tape of Treadwell's death goes on for a long time, recording the sounds of him being eaten alive. The balaclava that was found contained little blood and hair, and his pants even less. If a bear attacks a man, it won't remove the pants without them being shredded and soaked in blood. Normally, bears grab the end, especially when attacking from behind, causing extreme bleeding. So why wasn't the balaclava or pants blood-soaked? The plastic container that held his food there had not been disturbed, and bear experts said that if a grizzly had killed Schleyer, it is likely the same bear would have gone to the camp, given the proximity, and even eaten through the canned food. Everything points to the evidence being that Schleyer was scavenged by bears after he had already died. Many agree that the circumstances of his disappearance are very strange, even if they disagree with the cause. Bridget Parker, a spokeswoman for the Mounties and Whitehorse, said the case remains open, but the organization leans towards the idea Schleyer was attacked and killed by a bear. There's no foul play suspected, she said. Everything at the scene suggested a bear attack and did not suggest foul play. Even for an experienced woodsman, some believe that a predatory bear could sneak up on him and deliver a fatal bite. But the Vancouver pathologist who examined Schleyer's remains found no tooth punctures in his skull, nor indications of scratch marks from teeth. When bears attack people, they almost always go for the head. Apart from bear attacks, potential answers include wolf attack, but these are even more rare than bear attacks. And there was no physical evidence of a wolf attack or bear attack on the ground or on the bag that he was sitting on, which was also untouched with no blood. Now, natural death from a heart attack or brain aneurysm, with the body later taken apart by scavenging animals, is possible at 49 years of age. In peak physical condition, it's hard to believe that he could have had a heart attack or an aneurysm. Now, this one is the last example on the list, that he was murdered by the Russian mafia or another organization or assailant. Now, I don't know about that one, but it is strange that I didn't even get into Bart Schleyer's, background and what he was doing there or what he liked to do. But this man was a professional outdoorsman, and he had been on major big-time hunts all around the world. So it is kind of hard to believe that he was, something as big as a grizzly bear snuck up on him. And like the report said, there was no evidence that had happened at all. Anyway, so it is extremely hard to believe that something like that would happen. But we really have no answers as to what happened to him. It's just one that has always intrigued me. It's a story that I've always found very interesting. So I hope you like that one. I really have no answers or suggestions as to what might have happened. It's just something that interests me, basically because it takes place in the middle of the woods, and this guy was a major big game hunter, and he's just something kills him. Was it a grizzly? Maybe. The fact is, we'll probably never know. Just like most of these cases. So I hope you'd enjoyed them. Let's pick this up on the other end and get out of here. Alright, everyone, so Missing 411. I mean, these cases are incredibly interesting. Every single one of them, to me, is incredibly interesting. I have often debated about buying the books. I don't know why I don't have any Missing 411 books. I mean, I probably should. There's a lot of information in the books that you can't find online, so maybe I will break down and buy one, or a couple of them. I definitely want the Western and Eastern books. However, the cases that are in them are incredibly interesting. I am fascinated by the fact that a large amount of autistic children go missing within these parks. It's just I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's so crazy. These stories are so crazy. And I don't necessarily think they're Bigfoot's killing them. However, what I do believe is that they are stepping into some sort of portal, like we saw with Tom Messick's case. And in fact, for the longest time, David, he didn't really let on to what he believed happened, right? Or what he believed was going on. However, there was a documentary, an episode, or a short documentary, an episode done for the History Channel about two separate cases from Missing 411. And David pretty much comes out and says he believes that they are walking into some sort of interdimensional portal. Now, it makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. This is exactly why we're not finding them. It's not because they're falling into mine shafts, or somebody had mentioned falling into like a root ball hole, and then having the tree tip back over on top of them. Like, yeah, I mean, that could happen. That's scary to think that something like that could happen, but I don't believe that's what's going on. What's going on here? I really have no answers other than, if you find these stories to be interesting or scary, or something you want to look more into, David always suggests that people buy the books directly from him. Because if you're going to get them on Amazon, they cost a ridiculous amount of money. You go to canamissing.com and you can pick his books up for super cheap. They're like $20 or something like that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed these mysterious cases. I think a couple of them are very important, especially the Tom Messick case with the somebody actually hearing the sound of this portal opening up, as well as the story of Sammy just literally vanishing into thin air, with him being autistic. It really brings to mind, this telepathy tapes podcast and what these individuals are actually capable of, and what our government is capable of doing behind closed doors. There's plenty more cases where these came from. There's definitely even more mysterious cases. A lot of them are super strange, super mysterious. And if you're interested, like I said, go to canammissing.com. Buy the books because they definitely sound almost canon to me.